I've been sitting with this one for a while. Most accounts of the Second World War focus on the grand strategies, the famous generals, the decisive battles. But tonight, I want to tell you about something quieter, something that rarely gets the attention it deserves. How did a simple quarter-ton truck become the most important vehicle of WWII? This is a story that would shape the course of the war, though few understood it at the time. There's something about that distant, high-pitched whine of an engine that captures the imagination. Not the roar of a tank or the thunder of aircraft, but something smaller, more intimate. A sound that spoke of possibility rather than destruction, of going anywhere rather than staying put. The story of the Jeep begins not with that familiar sound, but in the quiet corridors of decision-making, where the seeds of this extraordinary machine were first sown. You have to understand the moment. In the late 1930s, as tensions escalated across Europe and the Pacific, the United States Army was beginning to grasp something fundamental about modern warfare. The age of the horse was ending. The future belonged to machines. But what kind of machines? Knowing what you know about mechanized warfare, what would you have prioritized? Drop it below. We begin our journey not on the battlefield, but in the quiet corridors of decision, where the seeds of this extraordinary machine were sown. The year was 1940. In a wood-paneled office at the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps headquarters in Washington, the morning light filtered through heavy drapes, illuminating dust motes that danced above scattered documents. The air hung thick with the scent of pipe tobacco and the weight of urgent decisions. Officers in olive-drab uniforms leaned over maps of Europe, watching the rapid German advance with growing concern. They had been observing the war in Europe with professional interest. The German blitzkrieg had demonstrated something the American military planners were beginning to understand. Modern warfare demanded speed, mobility, and mechanical reliability. The horse cavalry that had served armies for millennia was proving inadequate against mechanized forces. But the existing vehicles in the American arsenal, heavy trucks, motorcycles, and the occasional staff car, were proving equally inadequate for the kind of rapid reconnaissance and utility work that modern combat seemed to require. The Quartermaster Corps needed something that didn't exist yet. A light vehicle that could carry 4 men, traverse rough terrain, haul equipment, and serve as a command post. It needed to be small enough to hide, tough enough to last, and simple enough for a farm boy from Iowa to maintain in the middle of nowhere. In June 1940, as France fell to German forces, the Corps issued a specification that would have seemed impossible to most manufacturers. They wanted a vehicle weighing no more than 300 pounds, with a wheelbase under 75 inches, capable of carrying 600 pounds of cargo. It needed 4-wheel drive, a folding windshield for shipping, and the ability to operate in any climate, on any terrain. The deadline for design blueprints was 11 days. A working prototype was required in 49 days. 135 manufacturers received the specifications. Most looked at the requirements and the timeline and quietly declined. The weight limit alone seemed impossible. How could you build something strong enough for military use, yet light enough to meet their specifications? The timeline was equally daunting. 11 days to create detailed engineering drawings for a completely new vehicle. It was the sort of deadline that seemed designed to eliminate all but the most desperate or the most confident. In Butler, Pennsylvania, the American Bantam Car Company was exactly the sort of firm that might be described as desperate. Bantam was small, struggling, and had been building tiny economy cars for a market that barely existed. When the Army specifications arrived, they had little to lose and everything to prove. The task fell to Carl K. Probst, a freelance consulting engineer with a reputation for solving impossible problems. Probst looked at the specifications and did something that engineers rarely do. He believed it could be done. What followed was one of the most intense design marathons in automotive history. For 2 days and nights, Probst scarcely left his drafting table. The harsh beam of an overhead drafting lamp illuminated blueprints that grew more detailed with each passing hour. The smell of ink and exhaustion filled the small office as Probst worked through problems that would have taken other teams months to solve. How do you create something strong enough for military duty, yet light enough to meet the weight limit? How do you fit 4-wheel drive into such a small package? How do you make it simple enough for field maintenance, yet sophisticated enough for modern warfare? The answers came not from revolutionary technology, but from careful engineering and intelligent compromise. Probst stripped away everything unnecessary, focused on function over form, and created something that was elegant in its simplicity. When he finally lifted his head from the drawing board, pale pre-dawn light was filtering through the grimy window. He had delivered comprehensive blueprints in just 48 hours. On September 21, 1940, against all odds, the first American Bantam reconnaissance car, the BRC, arrived at Camp Holabird, Maryland. It was 30 minutes late, which in military terms might as well have been a century. But when the Army test drivers took it out on the course, something remarkable happened. The little vehicle performed flawlessly. It climbed hills that had stopped other vehicles, forded streams, navigated rough terrain with an agility that surprised even its creators. The crisp autumn air at Camp Holabird carried the quiet hum of the BRC's engine as it performed test after test, each one proving that Probst's design was not just adequate, but extraordinary. But the Army had concerns. Bantam was a small company with limited production capacity. If this vehicle proved to be what they needed, they would need it in enormous quantities. So they made a decision that would prove controversial for decades. They shared Bantam's blueprints and test results with two larger manufacturers, Willys Overland and Ford, and invited them to produce their own prototypes. The initial tests proved promising, but the story of the Jeep was far from over. The stage was now set for a remarkable industrial competition, a race against time, and an unfolding global conflict. The year 1942 marked the beginning of the Jeep's global deployment, and with it the full revelation of its extraordinary capabilities. From the scorching sands of North Africa to the humid jungles of the Pacific, from the frozen steppes of Russia to the bocage country of Normandy, the Jeep proved its adaptability in environments its designers could scarcely have imagined. This was not the story of a single battle or campaign, but of a quiet, persistent presence that made every battle and every campaign possible. In the North African desert, the Jeep encountered conditions that would have seemed alien to its creators in Toledo and Dearborn. The fine sand that penetrated every seal and gasket, the heat that made metal too hot to touch with bare hands, the vast distances between anything resembling civilization, all of these challenged the vehicle in ways that no test course could simulate. Yet Private Walter H. Miller, serving with a Signal Corps unit, found himself constantly amazed by his vehicle's performance. It carried the load of a 1.5-ton truck, he would later remember, and could go practically anywhere. The dry, metallic taste of dust hung constantly in the air, coating every surface inside and outside the vehicle. Miller's Jeep, like thousands of others serving in North Africa, bore a field radio strapped to its hood, the extended antenna marking it as a vital link in the communications network that connected scattered units across the battlefield. As his vehicle climbed rocky inclines where the shimmering heat made the landscape dance like liquid, Miller paid out communication wire from a reel mounted on the rear, creating the physical connections that allowed modern warfare to function. This was the Jeep's versatility in combat, not the dramatic moment of battle itself, but the steady, reliable work that made battle possible. It served as reconnaissance vehicle, pushing forward to observe enemy positions and report back through the radios it carried. It functioned as a command car, carrying officers to forward positions where they could see the battlefield with their own eyes. It worked as an ambulance, evacuating wounded soldiers from places no other wheeled vehicle could reach. It operated as a weapons platform, mounting machine guns or recoilless rifles when the situation demanded. In the Pacific Theater, the challenges were entirely different but no less demanding. Chief Petty Officer Mac McMillan, a mechanic at a Navy base in the South Pacific, kept a fleet of Jeeps running under conditions that would have been unimaginable to their designers. The humid, oppressive heat of tropical islands, the salt air that corroded metal with relentless efficiency, the mud that could swallow vehicles whole during the monsoon seasons, all of these tested the Jeep's durability in ways that revealed both its strengths and its limitations. McMillan's hands were perpetually stained with grease and oil, the metallic clang of tools on steel a constant soundtrack to his work. Under makeshift canvas shelters that provided little relief from the tropical sun, he and his team performed the unglamorous but vital work of keeping vehicles operational. The smell of salt and oil in the air, the sound of waves breaking on coral reefs in the distance, the quiet focus required to diagnose and repair problems with limited resources. These became the rhythms of maintenance that kept the war machine functioning. Yet it was not just the vehicle's mechanical reliability that impressed those who depended on it. The Jeep had achieved something more valuable than mere durability. It had earned the trust of the soldiers who used it. In an environment where mechanical failure could mean the difference between life and death, where being stranded in hostile territory was often a death sentence, the Jeep's consistent performance became a source of confidence that extended far beyond its mechanical specifications. This trust was recognized at the highest levels of command. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, would famously declare the Jeep one of the three truly decisive weapons the United States had in World War II, alongside the Dakota airplane and the landing craft. The Jeep, the Dakota, and the landing craft, he said, won the war for us. Coming from a man who had overseen the largest military operation in history, this was no casual endorsement. General George C. Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, was equally emphatic. "It was our best weapon," he declared. "Without it, we would have been in a hell of a fix." These were not men given to hyperbole. They had seen every piece of equipment the American military possessed, had watched some succeed brilliantly and others fail catastrophically. Their assessment of the Jeep reflected not just its mechanical capabilities, but its fundamental contribution to the way America fought the war. The full scope of this contribution became visible in the spring of 1944 as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Normandy. In ports across England, the scale of the logistical effort was breathtaking. Long lines of olive-drab Jeeps, some still in their shipping crates, others being driven directly off transport vessels, stretched across muddy docks that reeked of salt air, diesel fuel, and the industrial effort of a continent at war. Cranes swung cargo nets laden with supplies through the damp English air, while soldiers from a dozen Allied nations moved with the purposeful efficiency of men preparing for the most important operation of their lives. The grey, churning waters of the English Channel stretched to the horizon, but the beaches of Normandy lay just beyond that grey expanse, waiting for the invasion that would determine the fate of Europe. The Jeeps in those staging areas represented more than just vehicles. They embodied America's approach to warfare itself. Where other armies relied on specialized equipment for specialized roles, the Americans had created something different. A universal machine that could adapt to any role the battlefield demanded. The ingenuity that had led to variations like the Ford GPA Seep, an amphibious Jeep that could traverse both land and water, demonstrated how the basic design could be modified to meet even the most unusual requirements. The decisive moment had arrived. Everything that had come before, Probst's sleepless nights over drafting tables, Roos's insistence on the Go Devil engine, the factory workers who had built these machines with their own hands, led to this moment of global deployment. The Jeep's versatility in combat was about to be tested not in isolated engagements, but as part of the largest military operation in human history. Yet the climax of this story was not a single moment of drama, but the realization of something profound. The quiet, persistent reliability of good engineering multiplied across hundreds of thousands of vehicles. Each Jeep carried within it the accumulated wisdom of American industrial design, the practical experience of soldiers who had tested it under every conceivable condition, and the fundamental American belief that problems could be solved through ingenuity, hard work, and the willingness to build something better than what existed before. The war's conclusion was still more than a year away, but by 1944 the outcome was no longer in serious doubt. The Jeep had not won the war by itself. No single piece of equipment could claim such importance, but it had enabled the American way of war, providing the mobility and flexibility that allowed smaller forces to achieve objectives that would have required much larger forces using different methods. It had become the physical manifestation of American industrial might and the democratic values that industrial might served. With the war's conclusion, the Jeep's chapter as a primary instrument of conflict drew to a close. But its story, a testament to industrial might, was far from over. The world would never be the same. The numbers, when you see them written down, carry a weight that no words can quite convey. 640,000 Jeeps, built by just 2 companies, in just 4 years, by workers who had never seen most of the places where their products would serve. It was a feat of industrial production that demonstrated something profound about American society in the 1940s. Not just its capacity to build things, but its ability to organize vast human effort toward a common purpose. In the immediate aftermath of the war, as millions of soldiers returned home and the world began the long process of rebuilding, these vehicles found themselves in surplus. Vast staging areas, possibly in the American Midwest or European depots, held row upon row of olive-drab vehicles stretching to the horizon. Some still wore their original military paint, others showed the wear of hard use in distant theaters, and a few had already begun their transformation into civilian life with fresh coats of paint in colors that spoke of peace rather than war. The air in these depots was quiet now, filled with the distant hum of civilian traffic or the chirping of birds, sounds that seemed almost alien after years of military operations. The ground, paved or packed earth, showed the faint tire tracks of vehicles being moved to their final destinations. But the urgency was gone. The war was over, and these machines that had served their purpose so faithfully were now looking for new roles in a world at peace. Many found their way to farmers, adventurers, and small businesses across America and around the world. A vehicle that had been designed for reconnaissance and utility in warfare proved equally useful for checking fence lines on remote ranches, hauling supplies to construction sites, or simply providing reliable transportation where roads were more suggestion than reality. The same four-wheel drive that had carried American soldiers through North African sand and European mud now helped American civilians build the prosperity that peace had made possible. The transition was not always dramatic. A well-used Jeep, still bearing traces of its olive-drab military paint, might find itself parked beside a quiet rural road in the American countryside. The setting sun would cast warm, golden light across fields that had never known war, illuminating a scene of peaceful purpose that the vehicle's original designers could hardly have imagined. A farmer leaning against the tailgate, looking out over his land, represented a fundamental transformation, the tools of war becoming the instruments of peace. The Jeep's post-war legacy was beginning to take shape, though few recognized it at the time. This simple vehicle had created an entirely new category of automobile, establishing the template for what would later be called sport utility vehicles. Its influence on automotive design would be felt for decades, inspiring manufacturers around the world to create their own versions of the rugged, capable, go-anywhere vehicle that America had given to the world. But perhaps more important than its influence on automotive design was its demonstration of what American industry could accomplish when properly motivated and organized. The Jeep story was, at its heart, a story about the power of democratic industrial society to solve complex problems quickly and effectively. From Karl Probst's sleepless nights at his drafting table to the final vehicle rolling off the Ford assembly line, it represented the channeling of individual creativity and skill through industrial organization toward a common goal. The continuity of the supply chain that had made this possible was itself remarkable. The unseen network of trains, ships, and trucks that had moved raw materials from mines and mills to factories, then moved finished vehicles from those factories to ports, and finally across oceans to battlefields. This vast, coordinated effort had now shifted to peacetime purposes, but retained the organizational sophistication that the war had demanded. America had learned something about its own capabilities during those years, and that learning would shape the country for decades to come. The men and women who had built these vehicles were also transitioning to peacetime. Irene Schuster and thousands like her were leaving the factories, some to return to traditional roles, others to pursue opportunities that the war had opened to them. Their contributions would not be forgotten, but neither would they be fully recognized until much later. For now, it was enough that they had done what was asked of them, and done it well. The quiet determination that had characterized their work, whether on the factory floor or behind the wheel, had contributed to something larger than any of them could have grasped at the time. They had built not just vehicles, but a new understanding of what American society could accomplish when it set its mind to a task. The Jeep was the physical manifestation of that understanding, but the real legacy was the knowledge that such things were possible. The earthy smell of rural landscapes, mingled with the faint, lingering scent of oil and gasoline from these vehicles, became part of the sensory landscape of post-war America. The warm, golden light of dusk painting peaceful scenes, the smooth, worn texture of steering wheels now guiding civilian journeys, these small details marked the transformation of a nation from war to peace, from survival to prosperity, from necessity to possibility. The Jeep had served its purpose, yet its story continued to unfold, influencing the world in ways its original designers could scarcely have imagined. Its enduring legacy is a quiet testament to those extraordinary times. Looking back across the decades, the Jeep's profound influence on automotive design worldwide becomes clear. Pause 7s. It created an entirely new category of vehicle, establishing principles that would guide manufacturers for generations to come. Pause 7s. But the technical innovations, important as they were, tell only part of the story. Pause 7s. The Jeep's true significance lies in what it demonstrated about the marriage of industrial might and human ingenuity, about the capacity of democratic society to channel individual creativity toward collective purpose. This was the thesis made manifest, a powerful example of how industrial capacity, guided by practical intelligence and driven by genuine need, could shape the outcome of global conflict. Pause 7s. From Probst's initial design breakthrough to the final vehicle rolling off the production line, every element of the Jeep's story spoke to fundamental American strengths: the willingness to take on impossible challenges, the ability to organize vast human effort efficiently, the democratic ideal that the best ideas could come from anywhere. The simplicity and functional elegance of its design had allowed for extraordinary versatility and longevity. Pause 7s. Where other vehicles were specialized for particular roles, the Jeep had achieved something more valuable. It had become a universal tool, adaptable to whatever role circumstances demanded. Pause 7s. This adaptability was not accidental, but the result of thousands of design decisions, each one guided by the principle that form should follow function, that every component should serve multiple purposes, that reliability mattered more than sophistication. There is something deeply calming about contemplating the enduring presence of good design. Pause 7s. A restored Willys MB, parked in a serene natural setting where dappled sunlight filters through ancient trees or peaceful water, reflects the changing sky, becomes more than just a vehicle. Pause 7s. It becomes a meditation on the relationship between human creativity and the natural world, a reminder that the best human achievements are those that serve genuine needs without unnecessary complexity or decoration. The rhythmic sound of the Jeep's engine at a steady pace on a long road had become, for those who knew it, something like a mechanical lullaby. Pause 7s. The reliable companion on countless journeys, the constant presence through changing landscapes and circumstances, it had earned a place in the affections of those who depended on it that transcended mere mechanical appreciation. Pause 7s. This was the Jeep as icon, not just a successful piece of engineering, but a symbol of resilience, resourcefulness, and the quiet strength that characterized an entire generation. The vehicle had become more than its creators intended, more even than its users initially understood. Pause 7s. It embodied values that extended far beyond automotive engineering, the democratic belief that practical solutions could emerge from anywhere, that good ideas should be shared rather than hoarded, that the best response to challenge was not complaint, but creative problem-solving. Pause 7s. These were American values, certainly, but they were also human values. The values of any society that chooses cooperation over competition, building over destruction, hope over fear. In the quiet moments of observation, a Jeep parked at dawn, with the vastness of the landscape stretching around it, the soft morning light reflecting off metal surfaces that had been designed for durability rather than beauty, there was something that approached the sublime. Pause 7s. Here was human ingenuity made manifest in steel and aluminum, in rubber and glass, in the countless small components that worked together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The connection to the present day was unmistakable. Pause sevens. The spirit of the original Jeep lived on in modern vehicles that bore its name and carried forward its essential characteristics: the willingness to go anywhere, the ability to adapt to any situation, the reliable service to those who needed transportation that was more than mere transportation. Pause sevens. The descendants of that original quarter-ton truck could be found on highways and back roads around the world, still serving the same fundamental purpose: getting people where they needed to go, regardless of the obstacles in their path. This continuity spoke to something deeper than automotive history. Pause sevens. It reflected the persistence of human values across generations, the way good ideas echo through time, finding new expression in new circumstances, but retaining their essential character. Pause sevens. The Jeep had become not just a vehicle, but a vessel for carrying forward the best impulses of the generation that created it. Their practicality, their ingenuity, their willingness to work together toward common goals. The story that had begun with urgent military necessity had evolved into something larger, a meditation on the capacity of human societies to create tools that serve not just immediate needs, but enduring purposes. Pause sevens. The Jeep's influence on the world extended far beyond transportation. It had demonstrated that democratic societies, when properly organized and motivated, could accomplish extraordinary things. Pause sevens. It had shown that the best solutions to complex problems often emerged from the marriage of individual creativity and collective effort. And now, decades later, the events have passed into history. The participants have found their peace, and their story remains. A quiet testament to extraordinary times. Pause sevens. Fade to sleep. 8500. Silence. Fives. In the quiet evening of memory, we return to those calming images that have threaded through this story like a gentle stream. Pause sevens. The rhythmic hum of an engine, not urgent now but steady and reassuring, like the sound of a reliable heart beating through all the changes that time can bring. Pause sevens. The quiet determination of hands at work, the same hands that traced blueprints in the dim light of a small office, that wielded welding torches on factory floors, that gripped steering wheels through landscapes transformed by war and renewed by peace. The vastness of an empty landscape stretches in the imagination, and in that vastness, a single vehicle sits quietly, representing not just itself, but all the human effort and ingenuity that brought it into being. Pause sevens. The simple, functional elegance of its design becomes a constant in a changing world, a reminder that the best human creations are those that serve genuine needs with honest materials and thoughtful craftsmanship. Silence. Fives. These longer, softer thoughts flow into one another now, like water finding its natural course, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of a story that began with urgent necessity and ended with enduring legacy. Pause sevens. The enduring design of the Jeep itself speaks across the decades, a testament to the power of simplicity, to the beauty that emerges when function guides form, to the lasting value of things built to serve rather than merely to impress. The soft, warm light of dawn or dusk reflects off metal surfaces, signaling peace and the passage of time, painting even the most utilitarian objects with beauty. Pause sevens. In moments of quiet observation, when the busy world retreats and leaves space for deeper appreciation, we can sense the presence of all those who contributed to this story. The engineers and factory workers, the soldiers and mechanics, the countless individuals who did their part without expecting recognition, who built something larger than themselves through the accumulation of small, careful actions. The earthy smell of damp canvas brings comfort in its familiarity, connecting us to the generations who found in simple materials and honest construction the foundations for extraordinary achievement. Pause sevens. The steady, gentle thrum of an engine becomes not just mechanical noise, but a kind of lullaby. The sound of human purpose made audible, of problems solved and distances conquered through patience and persistence. Silence. Fives. The soft, cool texture of canvas seats worn smooth by time speaks of service faithfully rendered, of countless journeys completed, of trust earned through reliability rather than spectacle. Pause sevens. The muted olive-drab color that once served the purposes of war now blends into the quiet darkness of memory, taking its place among the colors of peace. the green of growing things, the blue of clear skies, the golden light of harvest and homecoming. Even now, the faint scent of clean earth after rain carries with it a sense of renewal, of the eternal cycle through which all things pass from necessity to service to memory, each stage carrying forward something essential from what came before. Pause sevens. The receding glow of headlights fades into the distance, leaving only the peace that comes when purpose has been fulfilled, when good work has been completed, when the story has been told and can rest at last in the understanding of those who heard it. Elent sevens. And now, decades later, as the events pass into history and the participants find their peace, their story remains, a quiet testament to extraordinary times, to ordinary people who did extraordinary things, to the enduring truth that the best human achievements are those that serve life rather than destroy it, that build up rather than tear down, that leave the world a little better than they found it. Silence, tender as music, fades to silence.